Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on the latest episode of The Walking Dead, What Comes After. As always with these videos I won't be holding back on any spoilers, so please do keep that in mind. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. Now it seems to me like nearly everyone on the planet, even those who don't watch The Walking Dead, are aware that this week's episode was a send-off for Sheriff Rick Grimes. And for the most part, I think AMC managed to give Andrew Lincoln a pretty decent leaving party, even though the episode does have more than a few iffy moments that I wasn't too keen on. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about Rick's fate at length during this video, but before I do that, I want to quickly talk about what happened with Negan and Maggie, as I feel it's better to get that out of the way first so I can focus the rest of the video on Officer Friendly. Now, I know that Maggie's time with Negan is going to be greatly overshadowed by what happened to Rick this week, but I would actually argue that their time together was just as interesting, if not even maybe more so than some of Rick's moments during this entry. I found the conversation between Maggie and Negan to be absolutely superb, and I'm happy to say it had much more of a lasting impression on me than the talk he and Michonne had last week. When Maggie arrived at Negan's prison cell, Michonne was there guarding it, at first refusing to back down. However, after listening to what Maggie had to say, Michonne decided that she deserved the chance to come face to face with her husband's killer, even if it could have possibly resulted in her killing Negan, which Michonne was so against. For the record, I thought that Maggie made some very good points when trying to convince Michonne to let her pass, which is obviously part of the reason why Michonne did decide to stand down. Maggie made the point to Michonne that if it were Rick who Negan had killed, she wouldn't be so keen on keeping a man alive who had left her to raise a child on her own. And you know what? I think she is absolutely right. I mean, look at it this way. Imagine if Negan had bashed Carl's head in instead of Glenn's. There would be no way in hell that Rick would have let him live, and the same applies if he had killed Michonne. So whilst I do understand why Rick wants to keep Negan alive, I also think it's quite unfair that Maggie's needs seem to be completely pushed aside and overlooked. And once Maggie did go into the cell to see Negan, boy did I want him to kill her then and then. Well, at least at first anyway. Straight from the get-go, Negan is an absolute bastard to Maggie. He says that he enjoyed killing Glenn whilst talking about his death in all its gory detail. At this point I thought to myself, you know what, Negan really hasn't changed one bit. He's still the sadist prick that I thought he was when he first appeared on the show, and despite spending a year and a half in prison, he hasn't managed to even find an ounce of remorse in his body. Maggie, please just kill him, please. However, it quickly becomes apparent that Negan is just trying to rile Maggie up because he actually wants to die. He wants Maggie to get angry like I did in order to be able to kill him, and this is because Negan, it turns out, is an utterly broken man. This once scary, imposing leader of the Saviours, who previously could have had an entire community kneel down before him just by entering a room, was now flown across his cell by Maggie like a rag doll and reduced to crying in the corner. I said last week that I didn't feel anything when Negan was shown crying about his bat Lucille, despite obviously what the bat represents to him. However, this time around when he was quivering on the floor saying that he wanted to die so he could see his wife, I did feel something. In fact, I felt a bit sorry for him, and this is because it felt more human to me than seeing him cry about a bloody baseball bat. Many of you left your comments last week about why you liked the scene in which he got upset about his bat, making some very good arguments, but I'm afraid we are never going to agree on this one, and that's absolutely fine. Like I said a moment ago, I get why Lucille the Bat is important to Negan, I do, I just don't think his obsession with a piece of wood makes for great TV, and to be honest, I never have. However, seeing him crying because he misses his wife, well, that resonates with me, and I think it's much more affecting for the viewer. In the end, Maggie came to the realisation that killing Negan wouldn't have actually made her feel any better because it is exactly what he wanted at that moment in time. Negan is clearly suffering and he cannot cope with being in his cell, so leaving him in there for years to come is a better punishment than putting him out of his misery. It was so satisfying seeing Maggie be the one with all the power over Negan. I especially like the fact that when she told him to get back in his cell, he just turned around and plodded back inside, head down with his tail between his legs, muttering to himself that he wanted to die. The Negan of old would have taken this as an opportunity to overpower Maggie and escape, but not this Negan. There's just no fight left in him anymore. He can't kill himself and no one is going to do it for him, causing him to be stuck in this painful, torturous limbo that he currently finds himself in. And whilst I do sympathise with him just a tad, I am happy that he's so miserable, which sounds horrible but it's true. Whilst Negan may have given up the fight, one character who certainly hasn't is Rick, as he somehow managed to beat the odds stacked against him to survive the nasty wound that he sustained at the end of the last entry. With there being talk on the internet during the last few weeks about past characters coming back just for this episode to bid Rick farewell, I was a bit worried like during the episode when Tyrese died, when he spent the majority of his time in one room having hallucinations, Rick was just going to spend 45 minutes on a slab as his life slowly flashed before his eyes. Thankfully, Rick only found himself impaled for a couple of minutes at most. Using his belt, he managed to hoist himself up from the rubble in a scene that impressed me due to both his quick thinking as well as how gruesome it was to watch. From that point on, it was one huge struggle with Rick trying to lead the herd away whilst battling to stay conscious. And staying conscious is easier said than done when you're almost bleeding to death, leading to a whole host of dream sequences and hallucinations which are all callbacks to moments from the show's past. Whilst for the most part these were all certainly pretty visually impressive, I mean seeing the younger Rick at the hospital talk to himself at the start of the episode really was a wow moment. Undoubtedly I found that some of these scenes worked a lot better than the others did. As well as callbacks to past locations, the episode also features cameos from 3 dead characters. Now before I go any further, it's important to point out that there are different ways of interpreting these scenes featuring these characters, which in turn may have an effect on what you take from them. The way I see it, you can either believe that Rick is somehow genuinely having a chat with the deceased, in which case the dead characters are really saying to him what they feel, or you can look at things the way I do and believe that these are just hallucinations created by Rick's brain. So even though, for example, it looks like Shane is really there talking to Rick, Rick is actually just having a conversation within his own head, and in turn that means he's putting the words directly into Shane's mouth. What this means is that although the Shane seen in the vision isn't angry about the fact that Rick killed him, this is probably just Rick's brain creating an image of Shane and therefore can't be taken at face value. For all we know, Shane could be pissed at Rick for all eternity for what he did to him. Apologies if I am getting a bit too philosophical here, but I think it's important to point out that for me, what we are seeing here isn't Rick having a conversation with a character's ghost or their spirit. Rather, it's just a creation in his own mind, which means the characters only act the way Rick allows them to act. Others, such as those of you who may be religious for example, might perceive these scenes a bit differently, which is absolutely fine, but that's just the way that I see it. Anyway, enough about all that, what about the actual cameos themselves? Well, I just mentioned that Shane appears, and as I'm a big fan of Shane's character anyway, I have to say I enjoyed seeing John Berthnell return. Seeing him joke about Judith being his daughter was quite funny, even though it was actually probably true, and I liked how he referenced that Rick had dug deep in the past to fight off insurmountable odds when faced with the Claimers as well as the Cannibals, something that he was going to have to do once again to survive. Also, credit needs to be given to the makeup team, as John Berthnell looked pretty much identical to how he looked back in season 1, which was filmed over 8 or so years ago now. The entire sequence just reminded me of how much I miss Shane on The Walking Dead. Look, I don't care how it happens, Angela Kang, but you need to find a way to bring him back permanently. I don't care if you have to explain it through magic, voodoo or time travel, I don't care, just bring Shane back. Moving on, and Herschel was the next character to appear in a vision to Rick. To be honest, much of his dialogue echoed similar themes to Shane's, but I did like the fact that Herschel made a point of stating that Maggie and his grandson are both strong. Admittedly, it was a bit weird seeing Herschel back at the farm without a beard, because in my mind he didn't turn into the character that I really fell in love with until the prison arc. However, I guess it did make sense for Rick to see him in his happy place at the farm instead of minus one leg living in a crappy rundown prison. I think the news of Scott Wilson's passing a couple of weeks ago made this moment all the more emotional to watch. And although it couldn't have been predicted when the scene was shot, in a way this episode doubled not only as a goodbye to Andrew Lincoln but also as a touching goodbye to Scott as well. The final character to appear to Rick was Sasha. Yeah, Sasha. Rick's favourite person. Good old Sasha. She was really important to him. I mean, do you remember all the scenes of the two together? Because I don't. As you can guess, I wasn't really a fan of this final cameo. Now, putting aside the fact that I always found Sasha to be incredibly dull, I just don't understand why Rick would have a vision of her. Shane I can understand because he was his best friend. Herschel makes sense because the two did become very close to one another, but Sasha, yeah, okay, I mean I'm sure Rick liked her, but I wouldn't say she was ever really that important to him, not at least from my point of view anyway. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to see someone else in his final vision, like, I don't know, his own bloody son? Eh? Or what about his wife who died giving birth? Or Morgan or Glenn, the two characters who helped him at the beginning of the show? Or even, how about the governor, someone who at least had a profound effect on his life? But nope, we got Sasha, which was for me very underwhelming and really took me out of the show, as did the crappy CGI background behind the pair of them. Also, by this point in the episode, I was finding the dialogue in these scenes to be a bit grating, with Sasha's perhaps being the most cliche and eye-rolling. I'm sure that fans of Sasha were delighted to see her come back, but I just think there's so many other different characters who are more important to Rick who should have featured. This just leaves his final vision. Now, the difference between this vision and the rest is that it exists purely in order to misdirect the viewer, so as to make them think that what is occurring is actually happening and that it's the real ending. And I have to say the writers fooled me with this one. Honestly, I cannot tell you how pissed off I was to see everyone appear out of nowhere to come to Rick's rescue and then somehow defeat two entire herds of walkers in a matter of seconds. It was so incredibly dumb. And when Michonne kissed Rick and told him that what was happening was real, I was ready to turn into Hulk and smash my TV into pieces. Thankfully though, Rick snaps out of it, meaning that this awful ending doesn't end up being canon, with him still desperately struggling to escape the ever-present group of walkers. Rick's final play is to lead the walkers over the bridge, hoping it collapses under the sheer weight of the herd. Unfortunately for Rick, the bridge manages to hold all the walkers, with Daryl, Michonne and Maggie arriving just in time to see Rick's last stand. Despite his friends doing their best to try and help fight off the walkers, there's not really an awful lot they can do, with them all being unable to reach him. And when some dynamite falls out from one of the bags on the bridge, Rick manages to find the strength to stand to his feet, proceeds to aim his gun in a similar fashion to when he shot the zombie gal back in the first episode, and with one bullet blows up the entire bridge. All the onlookers are helpless to prevent any of this happening, with Daryl's tears and Michonne's screaming being drowned out by the melancholic music that was playing in the background. Now, despite the reservations I had last week about Rick dying a potentially needless and pointless death, I actually thought this was a pretty decent way for him to bite the dust. We'd seen him overcome ridiculous odds the entire episode to be able to get to the point where he was able to take out the herd, saving everyone in the process. Rick would die a hero, and I thought it would be a fitting ending to the episode. Except, well, you all know he didn't die. Nope, instead, in a scene that was kind of reminiscent of Palpatine scooping up a burnt Anakin Skywalker, Jadis found Rick looking a bit toasty and managed to escape with him on the helicopter, with Rick saying goodbye to the show for the next few years at least. The thing is, I don't want to make it look like I'm sitting on the fence regarding my feelings on this ending, but the truth is at this moment in time I just can't really decide whether I love it or I hate it. I'm just sort of stuck somewhere in the middle. The problem with Rick leaving the show is that AMC have found themselves in a kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't type of situation when it comes to killing him or not. And I know that deep down it doesn't really matter whatever avenue they took, as I would probably found something to criticise, purely because I see issues with both killing him and not killing him. So firstly, let's look at the option The Walking Dead did take with its decision to save Rick. Now obviously, part of me is delighted that Rick lives on to fight another day. Rick's been with the show since the start, it's been his story, and after losing so many big players, I'm not sure I would wanted to see Rick go as well. Also, this ending sets up a tantalising future potential storyline in which we find out exactly what is going on at the HQ where Rick and Jadis are taken to, as well as the possibility of Rick appearing to the likes of Daryl, Judith, Michonne and Carol, who have all had to deal with believing that he's been dead for 6 years. And if people are wondering where I got the 6 years from, it was from a Facebook survey that AMC posted earlier today. Anyway, what I'm kind of saying is that there's a lot that I liked about this ending. I like the fact that Rick fought with every ounce of his being to survive. I like the idea of him eventually one day maybe reuniting with Judith. And I like the fact that his story isn't over. I also thought it was pretty clever to use the same music from when Rick was stuck in the tank back at the beginning of the show when he was being flown up in the helicopter. When Glenn's voice was played over the radio, Rick was putting his faith in the unknown, and here he was once again heading off into the distance, hoping that someone he's never met could save him and help him see his family once again. Now that's all well and good, however by not killing Rick it did kind of feel to me like AMC pussied out on making a tough choice, and the choice which arguably would have fit in best with the tone and direction of the entire episode. I was unsure about the idea of Rick dying before going into this episode, especially as I wasn't sure if the writers would be able to give him a satisfying send-off. However, the more the episode went on, the more I opened up to the idea. And when Rick stood there on the bridge ready to sacrifice himself for everyone, I thought, you know what, this is a good way for him to die. I would have been happy to see him go out that way, but seeing him manage to escape shortly after just feels like a bit of a cop-out. Granted, it didn't take away any of the emotion his friends felt as they all believed that he was actually dead, but it did still feel like a bit of a bait and switch to me. It also makes me think that The Walking Dead will never ever kill Rick, which you might not necessarily think is a bad thing, but if he does return to the show a couple of seasons down the line, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to take any scenes of him where he finds himself in danger seriously. And when you know that a character isn't in any real danger of being harmed, it does take away a lot of the drama. I mean, one reason why I thought the All Out War saga was a bit of a flop was because I knew that neither Rick or Negan were going to die. So now that I know that Rick is equipped with this almost impenetrable plot armor, it means I could find myself being a bit less invested in his story in the future. So that's just my take on it, and I hope you can understand the point I'm trying to make, which is that honestly I think regardless of whatever AMC did to Rick, I would never 100% be satisfied with the outcome. If he did die, I'd probably be here moaning that he was killed, but now that he is alive, here I am moaning that he's not dead. Either way, you can't win, so it's hard for me to really hold that against AMC and the writers. All I can say is that despite my indecisiveness regarding how I feel about the way Rick exited the show, I enjoyed the majority of what led up to this moment, and Kang managed to pull this off much better than I thought she would coming into this season. I spent an awful lot of time talking about the visions and dream sequences and not much time talking about the scenes in which Rick was struggling to survive in the real world, and as much as I would like to go into more detail about that, I just don't want to be here forever. But what I will say is that the scene in the house and Rick crawling through the base camp and Rick struggling to stay awake on his horse were all wonderfully done. I can't fault Andy's performance this episode, and I really could feel how much Rick was struggling at times even just to move his body an inch. So thanks Andy, you did us proud. So I've covered Rick's ending, but I haven't actually talked about the ending of the episode itself yet, which featured our first looks at the likes of Magna and Yumiko in a scene that was almost straight out of the pages of the comics. Now in the comics, this scene takes place immediately after the time skip that comes once the All Out War saga is finished, with it serving as a reintroduction to Rick and the various communities. In the TV show, however, we've had one time skip prior to this season, and now we've got another time skip of 6 years after Rick leaves with Anne, as evidenced by the reveal that Judith was the one who rescued the group. The Judith reveal was a surprise, but a good one to be sure. Really gotta stop with the crap Star Wars references. Anyway, I think it's a pretty cool direction for the show to take, and I'm glad that they are utilising Judith instead of just having her be a toddler forever. There was also a brief trailer for the next 3 episodes found at the end, in which it's clear that the Whisperer arc is next on the agenda. Personally, I didn't expect The Walking Dead to reach this point so quickly this season, but I am glad that the pacing hasn't been as slow as previous seasons this time around. I know it's only a brief trailer, and of course it's been edited in a way that makes it look exciting and appealing, but I have to admit I'm actually looking forward to seeing what comes after. 6 years is a long time and a lot could have changed, and this may just be what The Walking Dead needs to keep things fresh. So despite me still being unable to confidently say if I liked what the show did with Rick or not, I did find that the rest of the episode was bloody good, and honestly it was better than I thought it would be. If the next 3 installments can live up to the teaser trailer shown at the end, then we could have a seriously great half of a season on our hands here. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Please let me know your thoughts below. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you think it was a bit average, or did you hate it? As always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.